Okay, and we're back. And like I said, we'll go ahead and talk about the halo and the horn effects. So, these are truly they're biases that happen when, again, automatic processing results in first impressions based upon limited information, resulting in potentially um, misguided conclusions about someone. Okay, so the halo effect. This is when one positive characteristic influences how we perceive many other characteristics. Okay, this happens a lot with, I'm going to say, stereotypically attractive people. They've done research on this. That's why we have this theory. So, attractive people um are more commonly seen as friendly, smart, trustworthy, competent, and successful than those who may be perceived as average looking, so to speak. So, here's the thing. I guess somebody's attractive. People assume, again, they're smarter, kinder, all of these things. Somebody's charismatic, so somebody assumes they're a better leader or more knowledgeable or more competent. And so as soon as somebody perceives, again, a very positive characteristic is attached to somebody, then they kind of generalize that to additional characteristics as well, applying those characteristics to the individual in addition. So, forgive me, your last lecture is converting. Okay, our brains do prefer consistency. So, if we see one positive quality, our brain wants to assume that this person must have these other positive qualities as well. It likes consistency. It does not like well, inconsistency would be the word. And again, even without evidence, our brain wants to do this. Here's a good question. Have you ever assumed somebody's nice because they smiled? Have you ever assumed somebody is intelligent because they spoke confidently? Okay, an example of this, and I find that it's fascinating, is that and I've listened I listen to a lot of podcasts. And there was a podcast, and I think it was a comedian. He was talking about his younger years, and he and a buddy, they would get into all of these major sporting events like the Super Bowl and NCAA championships and stuff, and not have tickets. And what they would do is they would print off, what the passes look like and everything, and then they'd try to find their way into an exit. And the way they would get in is they would just act confident. They would just act like they were supposed to be there. And because they acted in that manner, those security guards were like, well, they seem confident they're supposed to be there. They must be there. They must, they must have tickets to get in. Again, that's the halo effect. Because you make that assumption, then you apply all these other things to that as well that are positive. So, some other examples. Somebody assumes a popular classmate is also academically strong. Somebody who's very athletic maybe is assumed to have great leadership skills, even though those are very different qualities. Politics, we do this all the time. Because somebody can speak confidently or charismatically, we make the assumption they can be a great politician. Guys, we have to stop this. Please stop. Or they look a certain way. Please stop. We need to think this through. Please. Thank you. Okay, so Edward Thorndike, he was the one that founded this theory, or this concept. He also um we talked about him in the intro to psychology when we talked about the puzzle box where he put cats in the puzzle box, the one that looked like it was from a Saw movie, and the cats had to escape. Is a precursor to B.F. Skinner. Anyways, he did this as well. He was interested in understanding how people evaluate others, specifically in situations where they have to rate different qualities about the same person. So he actually studied military officers. who are asked to evaluate soldiers under their command. Instead of rating just one characteristic, these officers rated each soldier on different traits like intelligence, leadership, appearance, loyalty, so on and so forth. And what Thorndike noticed was that if an officer had an overall positive impression of the soldier, maybe because they were physically fit or seemed confident, they actually tended to give that soldier higher ratings on other characteristics as well, even when there actually wasn't evidence for those ratings. So, if an officer thought a soldier was physically impressive, they were also more likely to rate that soldier as intelligent or dependable. But if they also had a negative overall impression, they tended to rate the soldier lower across a lot of different traits without having evidence of those as well. So Thorndike did conclude that evaluating each characteristic independently, people often let over their overall impression spill over and influence all of their judgment. And this is where the halo effect comes into play because one positive quality creates this as kind of like halo around the entire person. Um, and again, we talked about attractiveness and kindness, confidence and intelligence, so on and so forth. And here's the thing. Can you think of like a celebrity athlete or public figure who's excellent in one area, but whom people often assume is an expert in completely unrelated areas? You could pause this if you want, because I'm just going to keep talking. Now, there are a lot of former athletes and former coaches who run for political office that are complete idiots politically. But they run for office, and because people are like, oh, they were a great leader on the football field, they'll be a great politician. No, they won't. How much how much they've never held public office. They have no education in political science. They have no experience whatsoever, but you want them to do this? Yeah, no. What are we doing? They need to go like coach Little League. What this effect shows is that we prefer simple, consistent stories. And just guys, look around us. Please look around us at this. And so instead of evaluating each characteristic separately like we should, we let one positive quality influence our entire impression of a person. This has actually been supported by a lot of research after Thorndike. So for like the last 100 years, it's been demonstrated in hiring decisions, education, healthcare, politics, marketing, and courtrooms as well. So I'm not going to get too worked up. I'll try to stay off my soapbox here, but here we go. Okie dokie. So we have the halo effect and then we have the horn effect. And again, this goes the opposite way, even though I kind of mentioned it in the halo effect. It's that when there's that one negative characteristic that influences how we perceive many other characteristics, part of Thorndike's work. Um, somebody arrives late. Well, they must be lazy. They're not dependable. They're not responsible. They're unmotivated. But maybe one of their kids is sick. Maybe their dog pooped on the floor, okay? Maybe there was an accident. Maybe somebody in their family had a medical emergency. One behavior does not define a person. So again, when our favorite football player drops the ball, let's not apply that very important dropped pass in a Super Bowl to their entire being as a human. Because again, we really probably don't have evidence for the other traits. Very important. Um, I think we've talked about this enough. I will continue. So, once we have an impression, we look for evidence, kind of. So let's talk about, okay, the confirmation bias. So let's apply this to people. So maybe there's an initial belief, okay, this person is unfriendly. Okay, and so I made that first impression. They were unfriendly. They did not smile at me when I met them. They're definitely unfriendly. So what happens next? I see that they're quiet at lunch. Okay, look, they're quiet at lunch. They're definitely unfriendly. They did not say hi to me in the hallway. Definitely unfriendly. Now, I might have just ignored that I did see them helping out a classmate with some homework and was trying to actually was being very talkative with the librarian and did smile at somebody else. I didn't see those things though. I ignored those things. That is the confirmation bias. We are seeking information that supports my belief. I am looking for information that supports the fact that I had the first impression that this person was unfriendly. Anything that might prove that this person is friendly, my brain is actually going to kind of throw away because again, our brains like consistency. Even ambiguous information. Like, okay, they didn't say hi to me in the hallway. Well, they're definitely unfriendly. Not necessarily. Maybe they are I, um, rehearsing some terms for a test. Maybe they're nervous about a test. Maybe they're in the zone. Okay, maybe they're just tired. It doesn't mean that they're an unfriendly person, but because I need it to support my initial first impression, I am interpreting that as being unfriendly. And I'm going to also remember any of the information that supports my belief much more easily than anything else. And again, it's not usually intentional. I'm not thinking I'm going to ignore the contradictory evidence that proves me incorrect. My attention and interpretation is naturally going to be pulled toward what I expect and want to see because my brain likes consistency. So, once we think we know who somebody is, again, we make those first impressions, their behavior starts looking like proof. But again, we can fall victim to this bias. But it can go even further. So our expectations don't just change what we see through like the confirmation bias, they can change how we behave toward that person. So this gets into the self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, so okay, confirmation bias. This is when our expectation changes our interpretation. Now, the self-fulfilling prophecy, that expectation can help change their behavior actually. So, again, a student or somebody, let's say a classmate, let's say a classmate. A classmate's unfriendly. Okay, so again, I avoid them. I don't look at them in the hallway. I don't say hi. I don't include them in our little conversations in the classroom. As a result of that, they sense the distance. They sense like a little bit of the defensiveness from us. They become quieter. They become less warm. They were not initially an unfriendly person. And as a result of that, they do not talk as much in class. They're standoffish. They sit off by themselves. And as a result of that, I can come to the conclusion, see, look at them. They're definitely unfriendly. Okay, there's a problem here. There's a problem here. Their behavior is partly a response to my behavior and how I have been acting. I created the conditions that help produce the expected behavior that they're going to be unfriendly. Now, it doesn't mean I control other people. Any of us control other people. It doesn't mean expectation always comes true. This doesn't always work like this, but it can alter interactions. Another example, teacher expects students to struggle. As a result of that, they don't pay as much attention to them. They don't try as hard with them because they know they're going to fail anyways or drop the class anyway. So why put any effort into them? And so as a result of that, they struggle and probably do drop the class. You date somebody, go out on a date with somebody, but you expect to be rejected. Your body language is probably going to put off that kind of vibe. You're going to act distant and guarded. Unfortunately, it's probably not going to work out. Okay, so sometimes we don't simply predict social reality, we actually participate in the creation of it. And we have been able to demonstrate this experimentally as well. So this was the Bloomer study by Rosenthal and Jacobson in 68. It was a classic expectancy self-fulfilling prophecy research study. Okay, so Elementary school, students given a test, teachers were told that certain students were academic bloomers, or those were who were supposedly ready for intellectual growth. Okay, they were the high performers. These are the gifted kids, all right? Um, Now, it's critical to understand, okay, bloomers were actually randomly selected. There was really no test-based reason to expect more from them. Okay, they were just randomly selected kids. Okay, so here's the thing. Based upon what we just went over, if teachers even believe certain students have more potential, could that actually affect those students based upon what we just talked about with that self-fulfilling prophecy? I would say yes. Possibly through, okay, more attention, more interaction, maybe given more challenging work, more or better feedback, more opportunities. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean the teacher is consciously doing it. It might just be subtle differences in interaction. But the expectations can influence the teacher's behavior. Expectations influence our behavior even in subtle ways that we don't necessarily notice. And then the treatment can influence the student response and performance. And again, it depends on the context and interaction. And they did actually find that, oopsie, sorry, they did actually find that there was a significant, hold on. There was a significant effect in regard to the success of those that were deemed to be bloomers. Again, they were randomly assigned to those groups. Were not intelligence or success related characteristics associated with any of those students. They were all randomly assigned, but they did find a significant difference in success in the classroom based upon placing those kids in one group or the other. And as a result, theoretically, the treatment that the teacher gave to them as a result of that label. Apologies, my brain went off the rails a little bit there. So, anyways, why are first impressions so hard to change? Okay, so once an impression forms, okay, it guides our attention. We notice information that fits. That first impression, okay, it's a starting point, not isolated. All right, so um, we meet somebody, we think that they're arrogant because we notice that they're bragging, they're interrupting others, and so we interpret that as showing off. And that's going to affect our memory because our memory is going to remember that they were arrogant. And regardless of maybe they were friendly too, but we're going to remember those arrogant moments. And that can actually change our behavior, and that maybe we do become colder toward them and less welcoming. And as a result of that, maybe we become colder right back to them. And so, again, there's a confirmation bias. See, I was right all along. And so, what would it take to change our mind then? Would it take contradictory behavior? A strong situation? Somebody else defying our interpretation? And we can change those first impressions later. But that first impression does give us a lens to look through. So, let me. Okay, just a couple more things and then we'll take a break. I know we're almost to a good stopping place here. So, what happened here? All right, Jordan starts a new job. On the first morning, Jordan arrives a few minutes late, doesn't speak a lot during the staff meeting, checks their phone twice, declines an invitation to lunch. And so a coworker thinks Jordan's rude and doesn't want to be part of the team. What could happen next? Okay. So just some questions here. Okay, what was observed? We can see what was observed here. And from this, what was inferred? Well, that she was rude. She doesn't want to be part of the team. She's rude. She's standoffish. But here's the thing, is that what else could explain that behavior? Again, maybe she has a family emergency. Maybe her car broke down. There's a lot of other options. But then we get into, again, how might that initial impression affect future interactions? Based upon what we just talked about pretty greatly. Again, that initial interpretation can start a chain of events. But there's something else here that we haven't quite explained yet. So, what we observe here. Okay. We directly observe behavior, and then everything else requires inference. Okay, so Jordan was late, quiet, check your phone. Then we infer, okay, traits, intentions, and emotions without seeing them. We don't see any of these things. We don't see that she's rude or doesn't care. We don't see that she doesn't like. We assume those things. We're interpreting behavior. To know that Jordan is rude, we would not need to know what happened before work, why the phone checking, why did she decline lunch or they decline lunch, and what's their typical behavior. That's the thing. How does this person usually behave? Is this a one-off? So that's what we would need to do. That we see what people do, then our brains try to explain why. And we often do that explanation very, very quickly. And so this is where we get into attributions, the why behind this. And that's where we're going to pick up on the next part of this lecture.